Much. Jesus, we ask that you would speak through Matt this morning, that you would give him your words, that you'd open our ears to hear what he's saying. In your name, amen.
Thank you, Sam, for that. Thank you, Morgan and praise team, for leading us in worship. Happy Mother's Day. It's good to see all you moms out here and all you women. I hope today is a wonderful day today, that you're celebrated, that you're honored, because you are worth it. And I just want to celebrate that today with you and just honor you as women and as moms, as mothers. I also want to recognize the fact that today can be, for a lot of you, a difficult day, one that's filled with pain. And I understand that. And so I want to recognize that as well. And for some of you that have lost their moms, today's also a difficult day. And so as you're celebrating your mom or the mother figure in your life, remember those that have gone through a difficult time, that today is a difficult day for them. And think about them as well. I've had some tremendous mothers and motherhood in my life, but I want to first of all just thank my mom, who's not here today. She's in another church, and she'll probably watch it later, I'm not sure, but I just want to thank my mom. She's an incredible, incredible mother and loved us as kids very well. I know I would not be here today if it wasn't for the love of my mom and the prayers and the time that she invested into my life. And also my amazing wife, who's just a tremendous, beautiful woman, who's done amazing things for our family. She holds everything together. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't exist either. And we've had amazing kids, and it's all because of my wife. 90% of the reason why my kids are the way they are and are amazing is because of her. And the 10% that comes from me is their crazy good looks. I did run that past my wife first before I would say that, so I got the approval, because you guys all know it's not true. Couldn't resist. My kids thought it was good too, so. But I do want to recognize the fact that today's a difficult day, and for you as women, often I think you guys aren't honored enough. One day is not enough. And so I'm going to recognize that. And I think, Emma, what you said this morning was really, really well said. Because I see it in my wife, too, so many expectations, trying to live up and compare herself to other people and other women. And just to release that and just to be who God has called her to be, who God has called you to be. We love you just the way that you are. Today, as I process Mother's Day and what I should speak and on, I'll be honest, it's a little humbling to be up here, a little scary, to be honest, to speak on Mother's Day, because I have no idea, honestly, what it's like and what you guys go through. I've never walked in your shoes, not understanding what it is that you mothers go through, mothers of little kids and teenagers, older kids, the pressures that you feel, the shame that you sometimes feel in your mind, the expectations that you put on yourselves or that you feel from other women. And this morning, maybe you are praying desperately this morning. You're in a difficult place. And you've been crying out to God, and yet He seems so disconnected from your life. In fact, it feels like He's maybe doing nothing in your life. Your circumstances aren't changing. And you see the details of your life, and it seems to you that God is not present. That He isn't doing anything. And yet often I want to encourage you this morning that while it seems to you that He isn't doing anything in your life, He is crafting and writing chapter after chapter with the stories of your life. In fact, through the stories of the Bible, we can see that God is fully engaged and fully invested in every detail of your life. We serve a sovereign God who is above all, who knows intimately what's going on in your life. He is a great, great God, and I want to just share that today as we go into what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to first start with just the greatness of God and who He is. We need to be aware of that in these moments. Genesis 1 tells us that in the beginning, God means that God created time. He was before time, that He always was. And so we go to Genesis and we see that He is the Creator. He is our breath of life. In Exodus, He is our Passover lamb. In Leviticus, He is our high priest. In Numbers, He is your fire by night, your water in the desert. In Deuteronomy, He is your guide. In Joshua, He is the commander of the army of the Lord. In Judges, He delivers us from injustice. In Ruth, He's your kinsman redeemer. In 1 Samuel, He is the prophet, priest, and king. In 2 Samuel, He's the king of grace and love. In 1 Kings, He's a ruler greater than Solomon. And in 2 Kings, He's the powerful prophet. In 1 Chronicles, He's the son of David that is coming to rule. In 2 Chronicles, He's the king who reigns eternally. In Ezra, He's the priest proclaiming freedom. Nehemiah, the one who restores what is broken down. Esther, protector of his people. Job, mediator between God and man. In Psalms, He's our song in the morning and in the night. In Proverbs, He's your wisdom. Ecclesiastic, He's the meaning of life. Song of Solomon, He's the author of faithful love. Isaiah, He's the suffering servant. Jeremiah, He's your weeping prophet. In Lamentation, He assumes God's wrath for us. Ezekiel, He's the son of man. Daniel, the stranger in the fire with you. Hosea, He's your faithful husband. In Joel, He is sending His Spirit to His people. In Amos, He delivers justice to the oppressed. In Obadiah, judge of those who do evil. In Jonah, the greatest missionary. Micah, He casts our sin into the sea of forgetfulness. In Nahum, He's your strength and shield. In Habakkuk, He crushes injustice. In Zephaniah, He's the warrior who saves. In Haggai, He restores our worship. In Zechariah, He prophesies a Messiah pierced for you. In Malachi, He's the Son of righteousness, rising with healing in your wings. That's just the Old Testament. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, He's God and Messiah. In Acts, He's the Spirit who dwells in His people. In Romans, He's the grace of God. In Corinthians, He's the power of love. Galatians, freedom from the curse of sin. Ephesians, He's our glorious treasure. In Colossians, He holds a supreme position in all things. Thessalonians, He's our calling and our comforting King. In Timothy, Titus, and Philemon, He's our mediator and faithful pastor. In Hebrews, He's your high priest. In James, He's the one who heals the sick. In 1 and 2 Peter, He's your faithful shepherd. In John and Jude, He's a lover coming for His bride. In Revelation, He's the King of kings and Lord of lords, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. He is coming again, the one who will make all things new. And for you, and sometimes all of us, especially you as women this morning, it is hard for you to imagine that when you see the greatness and the magnitude of God, His sovereignty, His greatness, that seems so grand, so magnificent, and so mysterious. And it becomes so easy for you as moms, as aunts, as single women, when your life feels so chaotic, so busy, that you don't even have time to breathe and no one seems to care about you or even notice you unless you stop giving to them for just 1 minute. It's so easy for you to dissociate yourself from the greatness of God and His sovereignty, that mystery, and you can't imagine that you somehow fit into that mystery, into God's story. But you do. Ladies, moms, I want to tell you that every detail of your life matters and is connected to the great, miraculous, glorious mystery of our great God. Every detail. It matters. And God is working and moving in your life and in your kids' life in every way, even when it doesn't seem like He is. Even in your moments of greatest despair, He is moving and working. He makes all things good. There's a story in the Bible of a woman who had no rights. She was a slave woman. She was a foreigner, uprooted from her land, separated from her family, and forced to do the bidding of another. We pick up the story in Genesis chapter 16, and you could turn there if you'd like. It is a story of Hagar. Hagar, not only was she a slave, she was a slave with no rights. She was a foreigner. Abram and Sarah didn't even have the decency in this story to call her by her name. In their mind, she is almost less than human. And she only became visible in the sense that she became a means to an end for them. She was only valued for what she could produce. They didn't seem to even care about her at all. And I know that sometimes you feel this way as well. Invisible to maybe your husband, invisible to your family, your kids. Only there for what they need. Hagar is treated kind of as a tool. Because Sarah was not able to have children at the time, and so she goes to Abraham and tells him to go into her slave in order for her to obtain children. As a slave with no rights, this child would not even legally be hers, but be Abraham and Sarah's. She becomes pregnant, and of course there's jealousy. And Sarah goes to Abraham and complains to Abraham, and Abraham doesn't even stand up for what he knows is right. He doesn't stand up for the woman that he impregnated. And he tells Sarah, "She is your servant. Do with her as you please." And we see in verse 6 what Sarah did to her. And that's where I want to pick it up to read. But Abraham said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. We see that Hagar runs into the wilderness completely alone, abused, no hope, no rights, rejected, and feeling utter despair. That word that's used there for that Sarai treated her harshly is the same word that is used for the Israelites when they were in Egypt and they were oppressed and afflicted. It wasn't just that Sarah was mean to her. She was verbally abusive and afflicted her. She was awful to her. And Hagar runs away. She's out in the wilderness alone. You can imagine what was going through her mind. How did this happen to me? I've already had a rough life. I'm a slave. I didn't ask for this. This was not by my choice. I just did what was commanded of me. And now pregnant, rejected, alone, isolated, and abused. Can't get much worse. Can you relate to that? Have you ever had those feelings? Have you ever felt that way? Why is this happening to me? Why did this trauma happen to me in my life? Why am I going through this pain? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't ask for this. And yet here I am in the wilderness. Verse 7. There she is in the wilderness, in the desert, all alone, on her way back to her homeland, to Egypt. No one around her. I'm imagining in the dark and alone, feeling hopeless. And then verse 7 shows up. And the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai." And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring, so they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. In that moment, all alone, desperate, feeling rejected, the angel of the Lord found her. I don't believe that this was just an angelic being. We know as we study through this, when it says the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, that this was Jesus himself. And notice the fact here that he found her. He went to her. Jesus does for Hagar what Abraham did not and could not and would not. And what does this tell you, about God, when you are in the midst of your crisis, in the midst of your difficulty? What does this tell you about God? That God is pursuing you. That God cares about you. He finds her. He goes to her. In the midst of your crisis, in the midst of your difficulty, know that God is pursuing you. God is working and moving, and He's coming to you. He is pursuing you. I want you to notice one other thing as well, that God addresses her by her name. We talked about it earlier, that Abram and Sarah never speak Hagar's name. They just speak of her as servant, maidservant. It's as if they never saw her as a person. But God does. God sees her in her pain and intervenes. And God's first word to her is her own name, Hagar. Can you imagine what she felt in that moment? Probably for the first time in her life, someone actually said her name, looked her in the eyes, and said her name. In calling her by her name, God is telling her that you matter to me, and you are important to me. You have value. You have purpose. She knows what it's like to not be seen. She's been a slave woman her entire life. She was used to not being seen. And yet here, for the first time in her life, God sees her. What does it feel like to be seen? All of us, all of you, have felt invisible at some point in time in your life. As if no one even notices you. To be seen or feeling seen is a state in which parts of our identity and emotions and needs and or physical presence gets fully recognized. And that's what happens in this moment. And you and I, we all have a fundamental need to be seen. Why do we need to be seen? Why do we long for a God who sees? And what difference does that make to us? It makes all the difference. Because to be seen is to be significant. To be seen means that you're important, that it matters. There's a beautiful verse in Zephaniah 3:17 which says, He, speaking of God, will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with His love. God sees you. Do you know that feeling to be seen, to be quieted by the love of God, where you just dare to sit and be loved and seen. Psalms 33:13-15 says, the Lord looks down from heaven. He sees all the sons of man from his dwelling place. He looks out all the inhabitants of the earth. He who fashions the heart of them all. He who understands all their works. He understands, and he understands as he looks and sees each and every one of you. Psalms 34:15 says, the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears toward their cry. Isn't it amazing? When you stop and think about what we talked about earlier, about all the character, the attributes of God through all the books of the Bible, that the God, the creator of the universe, knows you by name. He created you, he loves you, he knows every detail of your life, he sees you in your pain, and he comes and intervenes in that moment that you're in. Just stop and think about the grandeur of that. It's so easy for us to disassociate ourselves from that because God is so up there. We can't imagine that this God wants to have a relationship with you and I. That he would come down and literally intervene in your difficulty and be right there and offer his presence to you. Jesus came to her. He found her. He sees her. God's presence was with her in the middle of the wilderness when no one else was around. I want to be clear here that this is not about the importance of you or me or Hagar in this story, but to show you how amazing and how awesome our God is and how incredible he is. It's to show you his grace and his mercy in the midst of your pain, that he, the God of the universe, there is nothing greater, would come down there in the wilderness, in the midst of your deepest pain, and offer himself to you. And call you by his name, by your name. That's love. That's an amazing God. That's the God you and I worship. I don't deserve that. You and I, none of us deserve that. And yet, that's what he does. God pursues, and God gives you his presence, and God hears. Some of you this morning have gone through some very traumatic things. Some of you are there right now, and you feel as if you're being pressed down by a multitude of issues and concern and frustrations, and maybe there's something that is overwhelming you that is bigger than you feel like you have the capacity to handle. And you question and wonder, God, why? Why am I here this morning? That is how Hagar felt. And that's why she ran. She didn't know what else to do. That's why some of you are running from the difficult things that you are facing, because you don't know what else to do. You're overwhelmed by life and the difficulties of it all. And it's in that moment that God shows up and he finds Hagar. And it's in this moment of your life that God is pursuing you, and he will find you and offer you his presence. Psalms 139, 7 through 10. This passage used to scare me. But it's amazing. It says, where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea. I used to look at that passage and think, I can't ever get away from God. And I got to live this perfect, holy, sinless life. I got to get it all together because he's at every corner watching me. And so I got to be just perfect. And I live from an unhealthy fear. That's not what this is saying. He says, even in those moments of your deepest and darkest despair, no matter where you're at, no matter where you're going, even I will be there and I will hold you. My hand will lead you. That's not a hand that's going to smack you if you get it wrong. That's a hand that's going to love you and lead you and hold you. That's what he's offering to you. He is with you. You can't get away from an omnipresent God. This is to be seen so that you can be encouraged and strengthened. That's what that's about. God sees you to encourage you and strengthen. That's what it means to be seen. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says this, "For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth." This used to also scare me. But it's not meant for that. It's meant to show you His grace and His mercy and His love for you. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. Why? So He can bash you over the head? No. Listen to this. To give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward Him. That's why He is watching you. He wants to give you Himself, to strengthen you, to encourage you. So wherever you are at this morning, God is there. Wherever you're at this morning, He's at work in your life right now, this very minute, to encourage you and to strengthen you. Isaiah 49:15. I love this. This is so incredible. Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will never forget you. Never. Just let that sink in. God of the universe, that magnificent God, will never, ever, ever forget you. God sees you. God has not given up on you. He's at work in your life right now. And I say this right now from my own personal experiences, that sometimes God uses uphills, things like marital discord, problems with your kids, chaos in your career, severe mercies that force us to Him in new ways, to experience new mercies and new grace. He's breaking up your foundation so you'll stay more closely tethered to Him. And I want to suggest to you this morning the possibility that sometimes the difficult stuff that you are going through is less about the fact that the enemy is against you and more about what God is wanting to show you what it looks like when He is for you. That in the middle of your despair and struggle and the difficulty that you face, that when He shows up in the midst of that, you'll never doubt that you had an encounter with Jesus. You see, in the midst of Hagar's struggle, Jesus showed up, and she realized it, that she had an encounter with the Creator of the universe, God Himself. And she gives God a name. She's the only person in the entire Old Testament that gave God a name. An Egyptian slave woman gives God a name. She calls Him El Roi, the God who sees me. What name would you give God if you had the chance to meet Him? The God who loves, the God who comforts, the God who guides, the God who forgives, the God of the second chance. Whatever you choose would actually say as much about your need as it would about the character of God. Because it is through our need, our struggles, that we experience God in our deepest way. What difference does this all make in your life this morning? It makes no difference at all unless you look back, unless you actually meet his gaze now in your life. Hagar sees God. She is seen by God, but she sees God. Do you recognize him? Hagar recognized him. She recognized that she was in the presence of God, not an angel, but the presence of the living God. In your despair this morning, I want to encourage you, whatever you're facing, that God is there. Do you see him? Are you aware of him? I can guarantee you that he's there. Sometimes we're so distracted by asking the questions of why am I here, that we don't recognize him. But he's there. It's promised throughout all Scripture. And sometimes we're so desperate to get out of our circumstance. We so desperately want to be removed from whatever it is that we're going through. And that's all that we can think about, that we miss God. Hagar's situation didn't change. She actually had to go back to Sarai and come underneath her. But because she saw God in that moment and she recognized him, she was strengthened, encouraged. No longer did she feel invisible. She had been seen by God. So she could handle the circumstance that she was in, the difficulty. She knew her identity. She knew who she was, and she could handle that. And she recognized that even if no one else sees her, even if Abram and Sarai never ever see her ever again, and are abusive to her, mean to her, that the God of the universe sees her. And she could live with courage. I'm not suggesting that if you're living in an abusive relationship, that you don't need to get help, that you don't need to put boundaries. I'm not suggesting that at all. So please don't misunderstand me and go get help. But I think often we try to run from our difficulties, our circumstances, and God is saying, I am right here. And we see this with the Israelites as well in the New Testament. They were expecting Jesus to show up and take them out of their circumstance, and they missed him. You see, because our God shows up right in the midst of whatever difficulty you and I are facing. Right there, he's with us, and he strengthens us and encourages us, gives us grace and mercy to be able to walk through the difficulties of life. And he asks only one thing of you and me. I see you. Will you look at me? My arms are open. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Will you look at me? God sees, praise team, you guys can come on up. God sees you today. He sees you with a look of love. If there's one thing that I want you to take home today, is that very thing. God sees you wherever you're at with love, grace, and mercy to strengthen you, to encourage you, to walk it out. And he does it so that you can be amazed at his goodness and his greatness. So that we can sing songs like we're going to sing now. Great are you, Lord. Because there is nothing greater than the creator of the universe coming down into our midst, into our pain, and being there with us. Know this week that God sees you, that he's there. Shall we stand? as we sing this last song.